Greetings, I'm Dr. Doug Campbell, and today we're going to talk about how to read a history book for a class quickly. Now, I know what you may be thinking to yourself. Oh my God, I know how to read, okay? I'm not stupid. Who does he think he is? So rude. Which, fair enough, calm down. I know you know how to read. I have confidence that you are literate. But reading a scholarly work of history for the purposes of some sort of academic course is a slightly different skill set from reading for personal enjoyment, which is certainly something that I hope you do because it's awesome. It's one of the best ways to spend your time, but this is a different experience than reading, say, a novel for pleasure, where you are reading every page, every sentence, every word, and sort of savoring the language and experiencing the narrative as it unfolds, and like, oh, that plucky young Bella. How is she ever going to choose between Edward, the sparkly vampire with the rock-hard abs, and Jacob, the sexy werewolf of indeterminate ethnic origin? They are both so dreamy. And how is a girl ever to choose? I wonder who she'll pick. I mean, it's not that kind of thing. When you are reading a work of history, in particular a scholarly monograph, it is a work written by a scholar specifically for a scholarly audience, where the author is trying to make an argument, to stake out a position about a given set of issues or events in the past, and to support that argument with evidence. So if you are reading that sort of a work of history, particularly if you, like I ask my students to do, read a book in order to craft a scholarly book review, what you are looking for is, okay, what is that argument? And how successfully does the scholar support the argument? What sorts of evidence does he or she use? And is it overall something that is worthwhile for a reading audience that is interested in whatever the book happens to be on? So obviously, with a book like that, you can go through and read every page, every line, every word from beginning to end. But that's maybe not the most profitable or efficient way to go about it. So what we're going to do now is just give you some tips for how to unpack a scholarly monograph, a scholarly work of history, as quickly, as efficiently, in as goal-oriented a manner as possible. Okay, so if you're reading a history book, the place to begin is intuitively enough at the beginning. For the purposes of example here, we are going to be using Fritz Stern's The Politics of Cultural Despair, one of the classic historical works dealing with the cultural background of the rise of Nazism in late 19th century and early 20th century Germany, which is a great book, like definitely if you're into such things, worth a read. But it could be any book. We're just using this as an example. And so what you want to do is you want to go to the very first section of substance, whatever it's called, could be chapter 1. In this case, it's the introduction, because what you are looking for is basically the author's main argument. And any author worth their salt is going to tell the reader up front, in the very beginning, this is what I'm trying to argue. This is how I'm going to develop this argument. Usually they will sort of break down, this is what I'm going to say in chapter 1, in chapter 2, in chapter 3, etc. This is how I'm going to unpack all of it. You can see the introduction here. It goes on for a good 20 pages or so. So it's dealing with the basic argument in, a fair amount of depth, but still it's not a terribly long section. And you can go through and get a sense of what exactly the main argument is. You can also take some notes as well, because you want to be getting something out of the book, so you can underline key passages, jot some notes in the margins. If the section seems long, you can just draw a line by the side, however you want to do it. And obviously that's only if you own the book. It is perfectly acceptable if you own a copy of a book to take notes actually on the book and write in the margins and stuff like that. If you're getting the book out from a library, you would never, ever want to do that, and it makes you a horrible human being if you deface a library book. But you can do what you please with your own books. So read the introduction, get a sense of what the main argument is. So far, so good. That probably seems, again, common sense start at the beginning, but then rather than proceeding on to the next section, what you will want to do is go to the very end, to the concluding section. So here, that's all the way on page 267, the conclusion from idealism to nihilism, because here, again, in the conclusion, what the author will do is then go back through the main argument and kind of restate it, basically telling the reader, okay, so this is what I just accomplished. This is what I just proved to you, and go back through it again. So if going through the introduction did not cement the main argument of the book in your mind, going through the conclusion certainly will. And again, this is not a novel. There's not a plot. It's not like a mystery. You're not spoiling the ending by reading the last section. You are going through and making sure you have clear in your mind, okay, this is exactly what the argument is. So read the introduction, skip to the end, read the conclusion. And for both of those sections, you want to do it in depth. These are sections of the book that you do want to read every page, every sentence, every word. Make sure you've got it all down carefully. Then, after doing that, so you've got a sense of what the main argument is, you want to proceed to sort of check the author's evidence. What sources is the author using? So this is where you want to go to the author's bibliography. And in this particular book, Stern has some endnotes sort of documenting his sources. He also has some footnotes actually in the text. But then you've got, we'll get here eventually, an actual bibliography where he lists, that's the acknowledgments. Here we go. So you've actually got a bibliography as well, which goes through and unpacks all of the sources and divides them up by category. In the case of this particular book, Stern is working with 3 particular German intellectuals, so a lot of these are works by the figures with whom he is dealing, as well as scholars on those guys. These are works in both German and English. He also, in the bibliography, has just general works on German history by a variety of scholars, both scholarly monographs, scholarly journal articles, stuff like that. And you can see it's quite extensive. And so you can go through and take a look at the author's sources. In particular, what you want to be looking for is the author using primary source documents, that is to say, sources from the time period in question that the author is attempting to study. And if they are using primary sources, what are those sources? Here, Stern is using works of intellectual history, but for the book that you are reading, it might vary. Are they using government documents? Are they using religious texts? Are they going from archaeology or art or any of that sort of stuff? Are they primary sources at all? And then are they also consulting secondary literature by modern scholars? And those two distinctions, primary sources, historical documents from the past, and secondary sources, works by modern scholars, definitely something that you want to make sure you have a clear sense of what the difference is. Both of those are important, but particularly for works of history, you want to make sure that the author is going from primary sources as well as the work of secondary scholars. If not, it's probably less reliable as a work. Okay, so you've gone through, you've read the introduction and conclusion, so you've got the author's main argument, you've taken a close look at the evidence. And by the way, as you go through the evidence, if this is a topic that you're researching for like a research paper or something, and you find sources that seem like they are relevant to whatever it is you happen to be researching, by all means, make a note of them. See if you can track down those sources yourself. That's smart research on your part, letting somebody else do some of that work of identifying stuff that you might want to track down. But okay, after having done all that, only then should you go back through the body of the text and actually start reading it. So in this case, going back to, after the introduction, going back to like chapter 1 and starting with that. And for this, it is perfectly acceptable for you to skim the book, which is to say that you don't necessarily have to read every last page or line or word, but you can sort of go through and try and get the gist of it. One thing you might want to consider trying is, you might be surprised how much you can get out of a book just by reading, for example, say the first and last sentence of every paragraph. And if you go through and read it like that, obviously, like, there is going to be some stuff you're going to miss. You are not going to get quite the wealth of detail that you would if you were reading every last word. But on the other hand, you can definitely get the gist. You can get a sense of what the author is arguing in each paragraph as they go through this. And you can get that material in an awful lot less time than it would take you if you were reading every word, every line, every paragraph, every page. So this is a very handy trick. And it also will enable you to identify parts that maybe you do have to read much more carefully. That there are parts, again, if you're doing research on the topic that the book deals with, there might be sections that only touch on what you're interested in tangentially, and you can just skim through those. Well, there may be things that deal directly with the topic that you're researching, and then you need to slow down and read the text much more carefully. But going through and reading a book like that, you can do it in a fraction of the amount of time it would take you if you're just reading it from beginning to end and absorbing all of the little details, every line, every word, etc. So this is perhaps a profitable way to go through a work of scholarly history and to be able to do so in a fraction of the amount of time. So that is the deal. That's how I would recommend that you approach a work of scholarly history. And I think if you do it in that manner, you're still going to get a lot out of the book, but you're going to spend way less of your precious time on it, and you can get about the rest of your life, which is what we all want to do. So, hope you found that helpful. That's all for now. Bye.